Welcome to another session of Onfleet's Partnership Spotlight. Today we are meeting with Onfleet's Director of Partnerships, Robert Fierro. Robert connects businesses with Onfleet on many integrations, and today we are focusing on the cannabis industry and how Onfleet's last mile delivery software is well suited to this nascent marketplace. So Robert, welcome. Do I have all that right about your background?
Yep, that's all right. Nice to be talking with you. Excited to talk and I guess share more about Onfleet.
Before we get into the industry, I mean, can you just tell us a little bit about what your role at Onfleet is exactly?
Sure. So I lead up I head up the partnership department. And here at Onfleet Partnerships, we're really working to break down barriers for our customers to be able to easily access Onfleet. And that's through a lot of different channels and different partners. What you find is, especially in the integration space, or especially with software, that integrations really help the customers to access partners on one side of the spectrum. So with Onfleet, we act as a back-end software. So on the front end, we've got our partners like menu providers and e-commerce platforms. And on the back end, we also have analytics platforms or other ancillary pieces that might tie into Onfleet. And so really looking to help break down those barriers so customers can use Onfleet with whatever types of software they want to.
In preparing for this, I learned that we might be talking about pizza delivery versus ice cream trucks. So can you explain to me what exactly that means in the world of cannabis?
Sure. So, and they're just always funny little titles there for the types of deliveries. So pizza delivery is more this idea that the driver would be starting at a retail location or an operator or at a dispensary location. And then from there, they would pick up a bunch of items, so say a number of pizza boxes, and then go out and perform a route of deliveries. On the other side, for the ice cream truck model, it's more an idea that these operators or these cannabis operators would be loading up their vehicles with a number of items and then going out and delivering to individuals based on the items within the vehicle. And so that way it's more of like a rolling inventory. Sometimes it's called a warehouse on wheels model as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to my old neighborhood in Brooklyn and the Mr. Softy truck that always drove around it. I think if they'd been selling cannabis, they would have done very, very well there.
Much more lucrative.
Yeah, exactly. So this warehouse on wheels or ice cream truck idea, that's in addition to scheduled or on demand quote unquote pizza deliveries?
Well, it's interesting because the way the compliance works is that customers or drivers still need to go out with a established route and then can also maintain a certain amount of inventory within the vehicle beyond the route that they're completing. And so the idea is that the driver goes out, starts completing these deliveries, also has this additional inventory in the vehicle. As they're performing the deliveries, the customers that are on those routes could possibly select items, or at the same time that they're out completing the route, they could receive additional deliveries and then remain out. Instead of having to return back to the retail location, they could remain out driving around, and then the general public could call upon them and make a faster, more efficient delivery as they're in greater proximity to that customer.
Yeah, so I mean that I can definitely see why that's good for efficiency. It does sound a little bit complicated to manage. So how does Onfleet software help dispensaries manage these two sort of types of routes, these two options?
That's a great question. And luckily Onfleet is flexible enough and intuitive enough that we've built in a way to manage both at the same time. And when we think about how this would work for an operator, they would be receiving orders from the beginning of the day or, from the day before. And at some point they have a cutoff. And what you can imagine is once that cutoff occurs, they can then use our route optimization engine to then create a route, get the driver out the door, and start performing deliveries. Now, at that same time, because they have that additional inventory for the ice cream truck model, as they're outperforming those deliveries through the Onfleet software, as new orders come in, they can also be assigned to these drivers in real time. And we have some auto assign logic that can be tied into this. We also have an auto dispatch feature that we can utilize. And this all allows for the driver to efficiently have these orders assigned to them, even as they're completing a route to perform these deliveries using the pizza delivery model. So really, you can merge these two different models together and just make it even more efficient for the driver. So at the same time that they're out performing their scheduled routes, new on-demand orders come in under the ice cream truck model and can actually insert themselves in between some of the scheduled routes, filling in time if it's available, and just making things more efficient.
Talking about the consumer side a little bit, I mean, in your experience, what are consumers looking for in cannabis?
I think there's a few different things they're looking for, but especially when we start thinking about delivery, they're looking at efficiency. They want communication. They also want selection. And so when we think about that, they want to be able to say, okay, I'm going to go out. I know that my delivery service is going to be coming by at a certain time, and that way I can plan around this. And I think that's kind of become commoditized in today's world, this idea that we have knowledge of almost every delivery that's coming. We have awareness, we can visualize it. And that's really where the communication comes in as well. We're just used to having our cell phone be this central place where we receive alerts and we can plan our lives around it. And so through the communication and just creating more efficiency for that end recipients, and Onfleet does all of this automatically too, without distraction to the driver. And then on top of that, we want choice. And so when it comes down to the items that, the customer is originally ordering versus the items that might be in the vehicle for additional orders, all of it just creates greater options for that end recipient so that they get a better experience. And then tying that with the efficiency and the communication, the customer knows when that delivery is coming. They know what items they're getting, and they know that on top of that, if they wanted to order additional items on the way, that they could do that in an efficient way.
So yeah, I mean, we're talking about an industry that is booming and growing, but we've only recently seen cannabis become legal in, for instance, New Jersey, New York, and Virginia have all just recently passed legislation. So what are some of the trends that you expect to see over the next 18 months as those laws start to come into effect?
Yeah, I think the biggest trends that people are looking for are some type of federal legalization, even if it's through banking or through interstate movement of goods. There's a big gap in the industry because the states are embracing it and they're making additional money, but federal banking is still considered illegal. So there has to be now new compliance pieces in place, and we actually partner with a company that does that called Dama Financial. So they actually create a compliance layer to allow for cannabis banking, which is very interesting. Also, payment services are regulated at a federal level, so you can't use credit cards for cannabis purchasing. So all of these types of things to make it easier to purchase and safer to manage, instead of cannabis operators, especially at the distribution level, having to move millions of dollars worth of goods and then having to receive cash payments on that, we're starting to see middle layer banking systems where they're almost securing their own movements of goods so that cash doesn't have to be utilized. But all of this should really be regulated at a federal level just to make things safer, make it more efficient. And so that's what I think we're really looking for over the next 18 months, is to see some type of changes at the federal level.
That's interesting because, I mean, you're not so much talking about cannabis becoming legal at the federal level as you are the ways of doing business in that space becoming legal before cannabis itself actually does.
Yeah, and I think that's just the way that the federal government has kind of have positioned themselves. They want the states to be in charge of their own means of distributing cannabis, of managing cannabis. And the states are figuring it out. And you can look across the board with these successful large cannabis operators that are driving incredible additional revenue streams for these different states. And as we're seeing that happen, I think the big thing is that the federal government still doesn't want to jump into the state and tell them how they should be operating. cannabis, but they definitely should be involved in making sure that the lines of payments and distribution through banking and other fintech elements need to be put in place.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. There's a word here in my prep materials, telematics. Can you tell me what that is and why it's important for cannabis?
Yeah, telematics is a very interesting space. I mean, it involves a lot of different technology around the delivery process. And in most cases, telematics are designed to make things safer. Now, in some states, this is actually a regulation requirement where you would have to have some type of video camera devices inside of the vehicles. So they need to be recording either the driver to make sure that the driver is safe and not distracted while driving. On the other side, you want to be looking outside the vehicle to make sure that we're monitoring what else is happening outside the driver, all the behaviors going on. And then on top of that, in some cases, they just want an additional GPS device to be able to track things. And so that really involves an OBD2 device. And you might have seen these before, the little devices that you can embed into the vehicle. It might track other elements inside the vehicle, like the fuel usage, oil levels. But then on top of that, sometimes telematics is considered for driver behavior. And so there are partner applications that are sometimes used that will measure driver behavior, like hard braking, speeding, distracted driving. And we work closely with a few partners on this, but the main partner we work with is Azuga. And not only does it allow for these fleet owners to be able to monitor their vehicles more efficiently and the driver's behavior more efficiently, but in many cases, it also provides discounted insurance because we're able to monitor the driver behavior. And once the insurance companies have a better idea and understanding of how the driver is driving, they're willing to provide the discounted insurance.
That's a very nice perk there. So maybe that's one of them, but I'm just curious. I mean, you mentioned one partner there. I know you deal with your customers a lot. So what do you hear from them? I mean, what are your cannabis customers' the favorite aspects of Onfleet?
We've grown up in the cannabis space. So just to give you some background about Onfleet started out of a Stanford StartX program and was launched on 4/21. I think they tried to launch on 4/20, but as things happen in cannabis, sometimes things get a little delayed. So, but sure. From there, we kind of grew up with the cannabis industry. Some of the first customers that we approached were cannabis operators, and at that time, Onfleet was just being built out, so there were a lot of additional needs that need to be built into the software, but nobody was really catering to the cannabis industry at that time. And so this is about 6, 7, 8 years ago. And due to that fact, cannabis was embracing our software because it is also used for compliance purposes. And amazingly enough, Onfleet built such beautiful software that it inevitably is now used in 500 to 600 cities around the world. And so we power multiple millions of deliveries a month. It spans across all different types of industries beyond cannabis, but cannabis is near and dear to our heart. And the great thing about that is that in the cannabis space, what you'll sometimes find is that the software that was built is not always at the highest grade. So it's not really considered enterprise grade software. And that's kind of changed over time, but especially in those initial years, customers were very questioning of the software. A lot of the times the software would go down, it would be buggy. But the one software that really remained strong, and this is really according to the feedback from our cannabis operators and customers, is Onfleet. And because Onfleet has to be at this higher standard, because we're always aiming at enterprise-grade software, the cannabis customers would lean on us. And so they would say comments like, we have a beautiful API, so it's easy to integrate into other software types and to build out a software ecosystem. On top of that, they would also say that our software is bulletproof because we would never go down and we were less buggy than other softwares. And what it did was it allowed us to be in a position where we could recommend software and almost be on a consultative side of the business as well. So just hearing these great things, and then on top of that, our ability to simplify deliveries to to efficiently manage deliveries. We see a 40% increase in productivity and a 30 to 40% reduction in cost associated with delivery when customers use Onfleet. So all of these types of things have really helped us put ourselves center within cannabis, especially in the delivery world, and we're considered the de facto solution for cannabis delivery management.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's an interesting sort of story of the company and some pretty convincing numbers. Just before we wrap up, can you touch briefly on the other industries that you serve? And, I'd be curious to hear like how much of an outlier cannabis is, or if there are others where you've encountered any similar issues.
Yeah, it's so we serve all different types of industries across all different geographies. And I'd say some of our main segments are, we support some of the biggest grocers in the world, prepared meals in the world. We support one of the fastest growing produce delivery companies in the world. We also support flower delivery, pharmaceutical delivery, construction. We support catering, laundry, basically anything that is delivered in today's world. We touch upon it in some way. The only thing we're not really focused on is field service work, just because it contains, or there's a lot of different needs around some of the feature sets that don't align with our value of focusing on high volume, high velocity delivery. But yeah, cannabis is very interesting in that there's a lot of regulations around it, but those regulations are actually drivers for the use of Onfleet, which puts us in a great position. There are other industries that I would say are somewhat similar, like pharmaceutical delivery. And then, what you start to see as well, which is interesting, is there's a lot of companies trying to combine cannabis now with mainstream industries, because the thought process is, okay, well, you got your cannabis, now you might be a little hungry, so you want your pizza too. And so we start to now see these mainstream partnerships between like food companies or large brands. Maybe you now need mouthwash with your cannabis because you just smoked it. So something like that. It's interesting to hear that these marketing and these mainstream companies are now starting to embrace cannabis, bringing it into the modern age, and really taking it out of the dark. Because even in my remembering of coming to California and joining Onfleet, I have this funny picture where I remember us, or me and some graduate students in some back alley in Boston, lighting up a joint and like smoking it secretly. And then, 2 or 3 years later, now all of a sudden I'm selling software to all these cannabis companies and making it, modern age and well known that cannabis exists. So it's been a very interesting ride.
Yeah. And just to hear you say that, it reminded me of there is a dispensary not too far from me in Niles, Michigan. And the first time I saw it, I noticed that there was a taco place right next to it that is just always packed, which I think is just absolutely fantastic. I don't know what you call that, cross branding or partnerships, I guess.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Well, thank you for your time, Robert. Just before we go, can you, tell the listeners, how they can find out more about Onfleet and about your services to the cannabis industry?
Definitely. There's a number of ways you can find out more about Onfleet. Obviously, onfleet.com is the number one place to go to find out information. We also have onfleet.com/cannabis. And then you can also email sales@onfleet.com or me directly, robert@onfleet.com. And we'd be happy to show you around Onfleet. Onfleet also has a self-service channel. So if you did want to sign yourself up and trial Onfleet, you could do that as well. But of course, we'd always like to have one of our incredible sales reps walk you through Onfleet, show you a demo, answer any questions you have. But we're definitely there to help. So, please reach out if you have any questions, and we'll be there for you.